What's the number one challenge for businesses today?
Workforce development, attracting, recruiting, and retaining people.
And that's why we created this podcast, designed for the frustrated CEO, the under-resourced recruiter, or the overworked manager, to give you the tools to tackle those WTF moments.
It's time to open another workforce therapy file.
Hi, and welcome back to the Workforce Therapy Files. This is file number 24, and this is going to be the first of a two-part series. We're calling it Layoffs and Layups. So today we're going to talk about layoffs. I don't know about you guys, but in my community and my friend group and family, I've seen a large number of individuals starting to be impacted by layoffs. I don't know if you guys are seeing that too.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes, I am.
And we've also had clients who have reached out because they are in a situation where they're planning layoffs. So we wanted to talk about what your requirements are, help you understand ways to do this. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that we also did an episode about how to treat people whenever you're separating. I like to call it separating with dignity. That's the phrase I like to use. It's in file number 11. So if you want to reach back, listen to that. I definitely encourage you to do that if you're planning any type of layoff. And trying to figure out how to apply that to a mass population, that's something that we can absolutely help you with. Okay, so starting today, we want to talk about some of your requirements as it relates to layoffs. You may or may not know, and we always tell you to go back to look at the government website or reach out to counsel because we are not lawyers.
That's right.
And I don't believe that our target audience right now are other lawyers who are looking to us for legal advice. Like, that's not really the space we're in. But I do know that for many of you, you may not fully understand how to navigate this space. You understand there's some legal cobwebs that you could walk into. So we want to make sure that we at least highlight for you the things you might want to call and ask your legal counsel or the person that you trust. So on DOL.gov, you can find information about the WARN Act. I just want to tell you that I know I have a Southern accent. Jim is actually flashing me a sign right now that tells me to spell it because it sounds also like Warren County. I say it the same way. So WARN, W-A-R-N, is the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Act. And it was passed back in 1988. That's how long this has been a requirement. And for something that people just don't know is out there, it has been around for a really long time. And I want to walk you through when you're required to provide advance notice to individuals. And if you are an employer who is planning a layoff or a plant closure or a significant reduction of workers' hours, you are required to do a WARN notice. So this is actually filing with your unemployment office, letting them know that you are going to be doing this type of action if you have over 100 or more full-time workers, not counting workers who have been there for less than 6 months or have been there and work less than 20 hours a week. If you're laying off at least 50 people or more at a single site of employment, or if you employ 100 or more workers who work at least a combined 4,000 hours. There's a lot of other descriptions about groups that might be required to file a WARN Act notice. But the reason this really matters is because it helps set up your community resources to support laid off workers, right? And it also provides 60-day notice so individuals can make the right arrangements to make their decisions for their life. And when you're in a community, especially smaller communities where there may not be as many employers, the time and notice is what's going to make the difference between continued employment for those individuals, right? All right, so what are some things that you can do to help people who are affected in a layoff? I'd love to hear some examples that you guys have seen about things that you know, because you know people who've been laid off, things that went really well, things that didn't go so well. Any ideas to you guys about?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the employer's perspective, when you notify, according to the WARN Act, the nice thing is that goes to the career centers, unemployment offices in your area. They will then reach back out to you to say, we see that this is happening. Here are some opportunities. Here are some programs, some upskilling, some training. They'll start to connect you with your employees with open jobs. They'll come on site and say, here are the things you need to do next. Here's how unemployment works. They'll do all that education for you. So utilizing them early is always good for an employer because it sets your team up for their next step. So that seems to me, I mean, yes, you're required to notify according to certain, all those things Jamie just said, which will be in the show notes. But it also, it's the right thing to do for your people, and also it gives them resources.
Absolutely.
So that's step one. They're going to contact you and say, we can come on site, we can educate, we can upskill, we can retrain, we can provide them with all the opportunities in your area. So I think that's good step one.
Yeah. And if you were to look at probably 80% of the episodes that we've done for the Workforce Therapy Files, all of it has been based on how do you attract great people. So if you've done any of those steps, then we know that you have a population of individuals that you don't want to lay off. There are a lot of other ways that you can even avoid layoff. So one of the things that we recommend with companies sometimes to consider is using furloughs. So if your overall objective is to reduce cost in your business, you can use temporary furloughs, not trigger the WARN Act, still retain your talent, and allow individuals to draw unemployment for peaks of time. There was one company that I worked with that had about 500 employees, and they were in a valley, but it was absolutely believed to be a valley and not an ongoing valley of business, right, in terms of what was coming in revenue-wise. So they opted to organizationally lock hands and say, we're going to do furloughs. And everybody that worked there, including their management, took a 2-week furlough where they were not paid. They couldn't use their PTO. It was unpaid. But the amount of funds that were taken out of what was required, the amount of cost, helped them get through the valley. And it may not be 2 weeks. Maybe it's 4 weeks, But I know a lot of people would prefer to be off a month versus being laid off from work.
Yeah, so that's a good tool to use before you get to the layoff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that communication is key in a situation where the company's in stress. And when you can include everyone and I'm not talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of employees. I get that's a little different, but the market we're in is the small to medium-sized company, right? So when you think about how you can be very transparent and say, look, we can either do 4 weeks of a furlough or we got to lay 50 people off. Those are our options.
Yeah.
Not making it a democracy, but this is where we are in the business right now, right?
Yeah, explaining your reasoning.
Right.
They like to be brought in on that.
That's right. Yeah. Because if you don't, they'll come up with their own story. And you don't want that from a PR perspective, right? That's right. So when you think about how can we make an impact to the organization, the community, the individuals that are working, perhaps if we take a furlough, which is a distinct amount of time off without pay, you don't lose your job, versus a layoff where you're going to be out of work. You're losing your job, period. Those are two different conversations. Because like you said, Jamie, I can work. I mean, I can go a couple of weeks without pay versus I'm out of a job. That's a whole different perspective. And one of the things that I really want to talk through today with you guys is, what about those companies that are using this time to lay off, I'm air quoting, because of poor performance? I mean, I hate that people still do that because it's all about a lack of management, in my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion, when people downsize because of poor performance, that's because their managers have not been armed with the right information to lead.
Well, I think I'm going to give you a couple of different ways that I would parse that, Molly. When we're looking at individuals who are using the word layoff for poor performers, they're absolutely bastardizing the word.
Yes.
Right? And here's the thing. You are not required to retain someone who is a poor performer. And it is appropriate to do all of the steps, to notify somebody of their opportunities to improve, to provide an ample amount of time to cure whatever it is that is the concern. And that is what's suggested, and really honestly what protects you as an organization and gives the highest likelihood of someone turning around their performance. But I also am not naive, and I don't believe automatically that leaders always do what they need to do, and it still might be the right thing for the business or the team. In those situations, there's a lot of other ways to handle that, but it's not a layoff. Now, in a layoff where you come out and you say, hey, I need to let 150 people go, why don't we just take out our bottom performers? Because I want to move forward with my 400 best, right?
That's
Because
fair.
I've been listening to the Workforce Therapy Files, and I know how to find all the best. And the amount of people that we brought in that were incredible over the last 6 months, I don't want to let go. The thing I will tell you is I have yet to work for an organization who has such solid performance data that you can really honestly have the substantive support for saying these are definitively my lowest performers.
Yeah.
And-
so you're going to create risk is what I'm saying for your business if that's the route that you go.
Because I was laid off in a previous life, but when I was interviewing for new jobs, I would always say I was part of the second wave of layoffs because I didn't want to be associated with the first wave because I felt like I would be labeled as a poor performer.
Yeah.
So I was the second wave. Like, this is really when it cut, right? Like, this is when they cut into it.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But mentally, it's a shift.
But I think it does take us to then what kind of criteria is going to be meaningful criteria for whenever I know I need to remove 100 people from my organization. How do I choose? If it's not low performance, how do I choose? Right? And I've seen companies do any number of things. They've done last in, first out. That's typically something that was well supported by unions, depending on the organization or the space that you're working in. I've also seen a situation, and I definitely recommend this, is where you're looking at what work needs to be performed and looking at it by role to determine which roles are not as relevant to the success of what we've got planned for the future.
We recently worked with an organization at Incipio that experienced, and they were affected by the economy and all the things, right? So they had to do the same thing. They had to go through it. And to be a part of that, I'm not saying that the message is easily received whatsoever. But if there's any way possible for individuals that are getting that kind of message to have any empathy for the person delivering the message, it's hard.
It is.
When you've got a very supportive and caring leader, CEO, this is not ideal for them. This isn't what they want to do.
Yeah.
So to have to lay off people, to downsize, to even if they are low performers, it's a horrible conversation to have. You are literally, you feel like you're responsible for changing the trajectory of someone's life. Just like you were in giving them the job, you're doing the same by removing it.
I am so glad you brought this up. So the very first layoff I ever participated in, we had almost 150 people who were being laid off. I'd been out of college for about 2 years.
Wow.
And I was the one communicating to people who had been with this company, some of them 20 years.
That's crazy,
Right?
Jamie.
And I remember I had nightmares about being attacked. I had nightmares.
Yep.
And in reality, I had my desk cleared. I had my car keyed. I got spit on. Part of it was because no one prepared me for these conversations, right? Nobody prepared me for how to allow the space in the conversation for the person who was on the receiving end of it. Nobody prepared me for the appropriate amount of empathy to show in those kinds of situations because so many people are like, stay and listen. And then you have others that are like, no, make it quick. And whenever you're done, stand up because that'll make people walk out the door. That was actually advice somebody gave
Yeah, they
me.
don't do that.
Yeah. No, that's not what
That
happens.
doesn't happen.
That's not what happens. And here's the thing. You might be the person that's communicating it, but the person that's receiving it is going through a million things at once. They are thinking to themselves, oh no, my wife's supposed to have surgery next month. Oh no, I was already a month behind on my mortgage. Oh no,
That's right.
here's what I owe the braces that just got put on last month. I owe that bill next week. Right? Like immediately the list of life obligations starts to just scroll through your head and how you're going to figure that out. And if you do not have the preparation for a leader, if you don't have that preparation where you show care and concern for the people you expect to show care and concern, you've missed out. You missed out on an opportunity. Because here's the thing. I have worked with people a number of times who have returned to the company when times were better. And their times will be better. That's the whole reason that you're making these choices right now, is to keep your bottom line as secure as possible for the others that are staying with your business, right? For the future of it.
What about remote companies now doing the layoffs via a Zoom meeting, or we've talked about that. We've touched on it a few times in other conversations. I mean,
Yes.
that's
I definitely think in that environment, if you do not have legal on your team, on payroll, definitely reach out to them, because when you have these kinds of conversations remotely, so many things come into play. They can be recording it. They could be asking questions to trigger the person that's delivering the message to react. There's so many different things that could happen to create greater liability than just the conversation of laying the person off. So when you talk about remote, I would definitely encourage any organization to get legal involved to ensure they're protected.
well, and frankly, selfish plug for both of your organizations, you can help people do that, right? You can
Yes.
help walk them through those steps. So you could be on the call with them. I'm saying all this. I mean, is this true? You can
Yeah.
be on
Yes.
the call with them and
Preferably
kind of
before
coach them through prior.
you have the first conversation.
Be on the call with them.
Yeah.
Give them warnings. Maybe even take the wheel a little bit when it gets wobbly. So there's help out there. Parslane and Scipio Works both do that.
And you have to do it before you have the first conversation. You have to prepare. And this is a point of frustration for me in general when working with small to medium-sized companies. Hiring and firing are the last thoughts. You know you need people. You don't necessarily know how you're going to get them all. So workforce planning is sometimes chaos. And then we have to cut costs, so we have to fire people. We have to eliminate jobs, even though they're the jobs that you had to have a year ago. It's frustrating that the thought of planning is so short-sighted. The impact of what that's going to do to the individual, to the business, to the community, to you, just as you were saying, Jamie.
Yeah.
You put yourself in a mental twist.
It was painful. And all of those were in person. So virtually, if we were to go pre-COVID, there was this era where the amount of virtual discussions like this would be really minimized.
Yes.
Right?
Had to
Before
be
there
in
were all of
person.
these remote work opportunities. And I would say that back then that was TikTok was really getting its start, Instagram Reels just getting its start. So the 3-minute clips right now of people letting people go and being recorded without their knowledge, it's very interesting.
Yes.
It used to be how people retold their story, and you could see through their words that it was an injured person's
Yeah.
view of how things worked. But now they don't have to add any color to it whatsoever. They're just recording you.
Yeah. Takes a life of its own.
Yes.
That's right.
And you know what? Even in person, I think you're at a point now where a lot of people are recording, and state laws vary in terms of how they can do that. But a lot of states are one-party consent to record the conversation where you're terminating them. So you got to be prepared. And if you go in there acting like this is just a business decision and it's business as usual, and you don't really care about the person that you're talking to, that will absolutely hit the interwebs.
Well, and then it rolls into a whole nother problem, right? When you execute conversations that you have not thought out, you have not respected compliance for both parties, you and the individual being laid off, you open yourself up to legal issues that are going to take a whole other life of its own.
Yeah.
When you're not effectively communicating, when you're not giving the reasons as to why the affected employees and what they're going to happen through the transition process, what they're going to get, there is a lawyer out there that will take the case.
100%.
And you can win.
And
You
maybe
can know
for all
you're
the
in
people
right.
that you let go.
Right.
Now we've got a class.
Now it's class action, yeah. But you can't think through, you can't not think through how you're going to do this. Because there's someone out there, even if they take the case and you know you are in the right and you're going to win, you're still going through years of litigation.
Yeah.
Cost, expense, emotional, tax.
Reputation.
And this isn't fear mongering. This
is real.
It's real. But if you put a
It
few
feels like
things
it,
in
doesn't it?
place before, so here's the thing. I'm imagining someone on the other side of this podcast listening and saying, I'm about to have to do this myself. This sounds awful. And it's not going to be fun. But if you put a few things in place beforehand, is what I'm hearing from you, experts here, then it can go much smoother and it can protect you. So there is a way. I'm sure for both of your organizations, you have a 5-step process. Do this, do this, do this. Don't do this, don't do this. Follow the script, get it right, be compassionate, be sympathetic, and then get it done so that you can then start helping them find their next employment.
And to your point, we do have a more outlined approach to how to prepare for this, but I do need you to know that it's not, we want to do this next week. Everything about the WARN Act requires at least 60 days notice, so if that applies to you, you need to understand that. But on top of that, you should see indicators that you're heading this direction because you are effectively business planning. You understand how your workforce plan delivers your business plan. You see the information in terms of the orders that you're receiving or the revenue markers that you're paying attention to. All of those things should be putting together what your plan is for how to execute this. So how do I train my leaders? What's my communication plan? How do I notify the appropriate authorities that I'm going to be doing this? And what is our overall care and coordination that we plan on inserting into the process?
And it was Workforce Therapy File 11 that had the, compassion.
Separating with dignity.
Yeah, separating with dignity, being compassionate. So you can
I think
go
we
back
called
and
it
reference
Breaking Up is Hard to Do. I think that was the name of that episode.
There you go.
So,
Good memory.
real quick, I know we've only got a few minutes left on this file. You guys remember, what was it, a week before Christmas? I feel like we all did. The big layoff that Big Lots had.
No, Molly, I don't know the story.
Big Lots, they were trying to do a merger or a buyout, and it fell through. And when it didn't happen, they immediately had to lay off. And it was, maybe December 15th. It was right before Christmas, and people were immediately affected and lost their jobs. Ultimately, because the store has to file bankruptcy and they're closing all the shops. So when you think of how that impacts a community and the communication and how it was handled, there are just so many, you have 200 characters, right? Or is it 250? Which is it? I can't remember. That's how you get your information these days.
Yeah.
Instead of researching and understanding it, people just made those knee-jerk reactions as to why that happened instead of really understanding what the reason was for.
Yeah. Can I ask a question of you two?
Sure.
You mentioned something earlier, Molly, when you said the etymology of the term layoff or laid off. That has always confused me. I remember when I was a kid and a grown-up said, I got laid off. It typically meant, I thought, that their job, they were just off work for a while and they were coming back. More like the furlough idea. Like laid off just sounds like lip service.
I think
to
it
me.
depends on where you work.
But what does
So
laid
if you were to
off
look
mean?
at a union,
Yeah.
a unionized organization, they will have contract terms that outline how layoffs work. And it could be layoff with right of recall, which means that I have the ability, my name will go on a list and I will be the first one called back whenever they start rehiring, right?
Yeah.
So they might have that in their contract, but they still have the ability to make decisions where they might have a significant period of time where you were laid off, and sometimes without any definite time frame about when recalls might happen.
Yeah.
So I think laid off does have this kind of broad brush view, and it gets used interchangeably with different experiences. But
what's
for
the
a lot of
difference?
companies,
What's the difference between laying off and terminating someone?
typically a layoff is through no fault of the individual.
Okay.
Termination is
Gotcha.
not always that way.
Okay.
But termination is also a standard term that just says employment has terminated or ended.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm terminating someone, it typically means that there is some sort of cause that is behind that.
Do people say fired anymore?
Molly says fired all the time, but I don't say
You
fired.
fired. That's my. Sorry.
Was that your Donald Trump
You
impression?
fired. Got to do your hand.
So good.
I'm making a hand gesture.
Yes. So
Do they say that? That seems inappropriate.
What?
I just
That
don't think
you've
it's as
been fired?
You've
sensitive.
been fired.
No.
Well,
So-
what does that word mean? Like, I'm going back to the
in
etymology
movies
of
they
it.
say it, but I've never been in a setting where people are like, "Step into my office." Why? Because you're fired. Yes.
Yeah.
Let go.
Like firing squad. Like, that's what I think. Like, it's like fired.
Yeah. No.
I don't know.
I think people change. If you don't give them the story, they make their own narrative.
Yeah.
The word "I was laid off," "I was downsized," is a lot
Rift.
different than "I was terminated," "I was fired,"
Right.
"I was let go."
Separated. All these things that, like,
the
what does it mean?
word means something when you're expressing the situation that's happened.
Yeah.
And because people are human,
Yeah.
I would much rather tell you that I was laid off than I was terminated for poor performance.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's good. That's a good explanation and a good way to lay it up
Yeah.
to the employee.
And the difference on a furlough is that it typically has a defined period of time.
Yeah.
So if I were to say we're all going to take a 2-week furlough, it's unpaid and it's for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, does that lay us up for part 2 of this, which is
I think it does.
layups, not layoffs?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think that was very educational for me. I probably spoke about 30 seconds in that episode because I am out of my element. But
But you also worked in a Donald Trump impression.
I
Of
did.
You fired,
That's the
and I
only
think
thing. That was 50%
that was the
of my time on the
contribution.
mic.
That was
yeah.
the contribution.
Okay, everybody. That was fun. It was very, like, again, it was very educational. I think a lot of people just don't fully understand what they're required to do.
Right.
And what they ought, and what you ought to do and what you're required to do are two different things. Yeah. So, what's coming up next in part 2 of Layups is we're going to talk a little bit about where the opportunities lie for other employers when someone else is laying off, and then how to approach that to access that talent. So, for now, let's close that file, Jim.
Thanks for listening to the Workforce Therapy Files. We hope you learned something new, and we're thankful for the time that you spent with us today. If there's a topic you'd like us to discuss, reach out to us. Our contact information is listed in the show notes. Until next time, keep your head up.